Good afternoon. My name is Katerina. I'm the curator of the educational program and the program dedicated to media art. Today, we are getting started with the first lecture dedicated to media art, and Lisaveta German is today with us, who is a researcher, art director, and author of many articles on modern art. She also is researching the art by the 60s men, and she has visited Venice Biennale for 5 times. And today we're going to talk about how the modern art was changing the image of a human being at the Venice Biennale. And today, as the topic is becoming human, we're gonna be talking about this topic and talking about how the image of person and human being was changing in different kinds of art, specifically in media art. And after we're done with the lecture, you will be able to ask questions. You can write them down in comments, and I will read them out loud to her, which will allow us to have a small discussion. And now, Lisaveta, over to you. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you very much for having invited me. It is true that we're living in a fun time, because I cannot imagine a different situation when having online journey at Venice Biennale became the new normal, the new reality. But I would say that it probably is a good thing to retell what is happening at the exhibition. This is the same as retelling something that has to do with music or architecture, because of course the modern art requires you to convey your personal experience, what you're experiencing in certain environment. But I think that today it would be relevant to go back to some of the things that were exhibited at Biennale in Venice. Going back to the year when I went there for the first time, I would like to remind you that Venice Biennale is the oldest known global forum, which was founded in the end of the 19th century, which became the beginning of such exhibition that was happening once every 2 years, and it was further developed in the middle of the 20th century and became specifically popular in the 90s. And now, in the first quarter of the 21st century, this format is still relevant. And Venice Biennale is not only the oldest, but probably also the most well-known, one of the most well-known about professional audience and broader audience. And talking about the broader audience, it probably is the most renowned event, because first of all it happens in Venice, in a wonderful city, which you will enjoy in any time of the year, regardless whether you're gonna go and look at Biennale. And this exhibition of modern art is some additional nice bonus when you're going to Venice, where you will experience wonderful architecture and European culture. So we're living in an interesting time. On the one hand, this was the name of the last Biennale, which took place in 2019, and on the other hand, of course, this is a reference to the time that we are living in, when we have certain limitations and restrictions, when we cannot travel that much, go to international forum, international exhibitions. This is what specifically pains me, but I hope that soon everything will go back to normal and we will be able to travel. Large festivals and exhibitions will open up again. They will be working as they used to before. I today saw on Instagram that Berlin Biennale is opening offline, of course, with certain restrictions for the visitors, but still, one way or another, it's not going to be online format anymore. So next Venice Biennale, which now will take place in 2022, even though it was supposed to take place a year sooner. So I suggest that you plan your time and go to that next Biennale to experience it yourself. And I'm gonna make a quick preview, prepare you to visit the next forum. And also, we will take a look at the last 5 projects that were demonstrated in Venice. I'd like to tell you that Venice Biennale is not that simple to comprehend, even over the course of a week. Even if you stay there from morning till night, this is quite a complicated, complex, multi-layer event. So, of course, I will not even be trying to tell you everything that was happening there. That is why organizers of the educational program suggested me the following, something that is very interesting, that is related to becoming human, the topic of today, of this year's Linoleum Festival. This allows us to look at what is happening with humanity as such, and that it still is in the center of attention of curators of the final Biennale class for the last 10 years. This is a period of time throughout which I was visiting it in person. So today we're gonna focus on a brief overview of 5 exhibitions that took place over the last years, and we're gonna look at several things that were exhibited there that, in my opinion, reveal the image of a human being, how it was perceived, how it was presented by artists from different countries. And on the other hand, we will look at the metamorphosis of the concept of practice, approaches, and how human being is represented in different media, in different formats that we have been observing it in the last 10 years. And I believe that art is very sensitive, very reactive reflection of what is happening in society, politics, and history. And this allows us to see how the approach to human being was changing over the course of years, and we'll understand how attitude towards human being was changing in the society, how people change their attitude towards themselves. And a quick disclaimer, I think that majority of the wonderful audience watching Linoleum knows what Venice Biennale is, but let me explain it in a nutshell. It normally has national pavilions, which means that every country, every 2 years, presents something in a separate building by artists, and not necessarily these have to be people from this country. This also can be artists from other countries and other states. And today we're not going to talk about these pavilions, but rather we're going to talk about the main exhibition, or the central pavilion. So every 2 years, in this large commonwealth of national pavilions, there is one international one, which always is broken into 2 main parts, 2 main pavilions. Arsenali, so this is the old building, which in the old time used to produce weapon. Now it is simply used for exhibitions. And second one, the central pavilion in Hardini Gardens, and this main exhibition is curated by a new male or female curator. Normally this is a very experienced person, very experienced practitioner, who are carrying out the research for 2 years, meet with artists, think about the topic of the exhibition. So every 2 years, Biennale has a new topic, like a concept. I don't really like the word concept, but this is the term that many people use. And concept, this concept is something of more of a generalized nature. And in the introductory text, the curators present the main thoughts and ideas that are represented at this specific exhibition. And then it unwraps based on the dialogues between different artists and different works by different artists. They are reflecting about this general topic, but they don't have to be restricted by it specifically. So you shouldn't perceive it as literally an illustration of what was said and written by the curator. I'd rather say that the curator is following the images that the artists are suggesting. And this main concept, this main topic, is more of an explanation how the curator reacts, how they pick these artworks. Well, this is it for the introduction. Let's look at it. So, our quick journey in time and space starts in 2011. Biennale in 2011 was created by Bici curator, and it was called Illuminations. We see the introductory poster or the cover. We see that Illumi is light and the word nations are separated. Of course, that is for a reason. The concept of that Biennale was based on two important things. The first one is thinking about the concept of light as something of utmost importance for the history of light, specifically European art. And of course, it was intellectual hint at the period of Enlightenment, which became important for the European culture over the last 100 years. And on the other hand, the word nations emphasized how curator was interested in the fact that modern art doesn't have boundaries. So when we're talking about national art, when we're talking about modern art, nation seems to be something outdated, because modern art is something international, and even this concept of this national pavilions that still exist at Biennale is now being reviewed, because sometimes there are artists represented in the pavilions by some country, and these artists not necessarily also come from this country. So here we're talking about light as a physical concept and something transcendental, something symbolical, and a notion of nations, and how the modern art reacts to constantly increasingly open borders. And this is how the curator was also picking different artworks. First, you could look at Tintoretto. This is the artist of the late Renaissance. All of his works are very closely related to his Venice. Some of his paintings were taken from Venice museums. So this also is a bridge that is connecting us to the history and traditions of Venice. Tintoretto is well known because he was one of the first painters who was interested in not physical, but rather autonomous, symbolical meaning of light in art. He was using it not simply as a touch of nature in the picture. He was not only using it where the person could see the source of light, seeing it as an element of landscape when there is a sun shining, or showing that there is a candle or some other visible source of light, but rather something coming from God, something secretive. And light was one of the main elements of his artwork. That is why he was included to this exhibition. Moreover, it was one of the focal points, and it was very important for the curator, and the visitors started looking at the exhibition from this work. One more artwork, which on the one hand demonstrated this image of light and fire in this case, because I hope that you can see a candle, quite a large candle though, which is like a wax copy, a sculpture of a human being. This is a portrait of Urs Fischer. It was made of two parts, two candles. The first one, as I said, that is him. Again, this is an image of a person that is burning up, that is melting, who's wearing a nice outfit, a portrait of white Anglo-Saxon men, middle-aged, very typical image again. And on the other hand, we see the second sculpture, a second large candle. This is a huge sculpture from the Mannerism age. the period which happened after Renaissance, prior to Baroque. This was also quite typical for that period of European art. We see a lot of plasticity, and these both sculptures, in the course of exhibition, by the way, it lasts quite long, usually up to 6 months, normally 5 to 6 months. These candles were burning over this period of time, and this fire was destroying the sculptures, was destroying artwork, and on the one hand was also destroying human being, and on the other hand also this wonderful sculpture. So you can interpret it in any way you'd like. One more important artwork for this exhibition, and our talk about the human image, how it was changing, what the curator tried to emphasize. This is done by the artists, and I believe that everybody should know her name, everybody who is seriously interested in modern art. This is American Cindy Sherman, American artist Cindy Sherman. She depicts herself. And these are enactment scenes. She always wears something interesting, puts makeup on. You can recognize her though, you can recognize her face, as if still hinting that this still is her, even though she changed her personality, but she always changes some of her outfits, the background, her hair styles. This very often looks like a carnival. She sometimes dresses up like different celebrities, showbiz celebrities, well-known historical personalities, and on the one hand we see that this is a woman, image of a woman who is showing herself. This is important if we're talking about Sherman's artworks. This also has a hint at emancipation when she's showing that we have to deconstruct all traditions of depicting person in art, when normally artist or painter is a man. And we know that taking the majority of Western art, painters were male. They painted both men and women, but women were objectivized to a certain extent, and here the artist serves both as a model and as the one who is looking at this piece of art. And the fact that the curator picked this, because this is classics of modern art, and once again reminded us that it's important to change the roles of the one who is depicted and who is being depicted and how it is being depicted. And once again it emphasizes the need to make human image more complex. And one of the most important artworks, if I'm not mistaken, it got the Golden Lion as the best artwork. This is a film by Christian Marclay. I'd like to say a couple of words before we watch this video. It was called The Clock, and it was made of fragments. It lasted 24 hours. So this is a video that was shown 24/7. It was made of fragments from different movies and films with clocks and arrows. And the time that we saw in different fragments was showing exact time as the time when the viewer was watching this film. So at any point in the course of the day, well, at least when the exhibition was open, you could see that the clock hands were showing the same time, the exact time in Venice. Let's take a look at the part of this video.
utterly useless. No one cares what we have to say.
Hundreds of small craft, led by 6 fire tugs making fountains of water, formed an escort flotilla, and 4 Wasp helicopters flew past in salute. In the city, the Financial Times Ordinary Share Index was down 10 points an hour ago at 529.8. BBC Radio News.
My God, we made it. Well done, Charles. Knew you wouldn't let me down. God, that was close. Whew.
This is enough, and this is enough. Just to get the grasp of what is happening in the video. Let's move on. Well, of course it is difficult to get the grasp of what was shown in the video, because the time that was now shown on the screen on the clock is not the same as the time that we have now in Kyiv, but I think that you still can understand the gist of it. And when you're looking at it in real time, you just cannot look away. Because on the one hand, you wonder what's going to happen next. And then there will be the next fragment, and then one more fragment. This interest that the cinematography evokes in you doesn't seem to cause the emotion that you're looking for, because there is no end. And the main effect of this film was not even the picture, but how the person was feeling within time, the concept of time, understanding how the time passes, how do we measure it? Is time something that we feel physically, or is time something that has been imposed by us, on us by the mechanisms, the rhythm of the city, other people surrounding us? So we're constantly living among the markers of time. So what is time? Is it our experience or something coming from the outside? Quite an interesting question. And the methodology of how this film was created also is impressive. It required lots of work with archives, looking for these fragments. This is like encyclopedia of world cinematography. And by the way, talking about encyclopedia and ambitions, trying to cover all of the human being knowledge, all of the knowledge that can be found in culture and art, was the topic of next Biennale in 2013, which was called Il Palazzo Enciclopedico, and the artistic director was Massimiliano Gioni. And on this poster we can again see a human being. We see a small computer in human being's head with the arrows pointed different sides. And the name of this project was dedicated to utopia, fantasy, aspiration to try and get the grasp of all of the human knowledge about the surrounding world, at the same time the impossibility to do so. The name was taken from 1955 by the amateur engineer Mr. Marina Orizzi, who in 1955 created a prototype of a building which he called Encyclopedia Palace, and he even had enough time to get the patent for this idea in the United States of America. His idea was to build the huge pyramid, which we can see now on the screen, which would keep the data and information about all things, events, To put it short, everything about what happened in the world. Of course, this was very much a utopia, but we do not know how serious his plans were. But the Patent Bureau perceived that quite seriously, and it also looks like a Babylon Tower. And again, it shows that his intentions were quite serious, but it is not known how he was planning to construct it. Because we understand that with the time there will be more and more information coming, and Mauricio probably could not predict how complex is the knowledge and how fast media will be developing and how much it will change our perception of knowledge and how much the internet will change it. This was again the focal point, but it was also supplemented by the series of photography by an artist from Nigeria who started 1960s, was taking pictures of different hairstyles done by Nigerian men and women, and putting it next to this Encyclopedia Palace was like an opening statement done by the artistic director of this exhibition, which demonstrates how we should put a quality mark between what we're calling the high art with something that is very untypical for European context, but something important for countries outside Europe, how they are trying to keep and store knowledge. Here's a question: is hairstyle an artwork? For Nigerian society, why not, would be the answer, because this is not simply a way of look prettier, but it also is a cultural statement. This is a tradition. That is why taking pictures in the 60s of this practice that has almost vanished by now was very important for the artists. And showing these pictures today at the Modern Art exhibition once again demonstrates us how flexible and agile can be the concept of modern art. That is why this whole exhibition demonstrated us that modern art doesn't have boundaries, and human knowledge, thanks to the works made by artists, are kept and are quite inclusive. And on the other hand, it allowed us to see that you don't have to have professional background in art. Any person from any other walk of life, some people in changed with changed consciousness, some who are involved in different ritual practice like shamans, can also create art. That is why art is a much broader concept. And to prove that, I'd like to show the next artwork, which is called The Red Book, which was written by Carl Jung, one of the founders of psychoanalysis, a well-known psychoanalyst. And this book shows his journal, where he was writing some of his observations, his thoughts that were related to the development of his theory. And on the other hand, he added pictures to them, the pictures that in a certain way also illustrated how he was working with subconscious things, with the things that a human being cannot reflect upon, that they cannot express verbally. Something that can be depicted visually. It is included in that book, and showing this book and showing these images that were created by Jung and demonstrating them as artwork is one of the best ways that were used by the art director to convey what human being is capable of, what imagination and subconsciousness of a human being is capable of.
And that the subconscious and fantasy capabilities are much broader than we can imagine. And a very important work in the context of the conversation about the human being, about his or her just endless capabilities, the work of the Italian director and artist Da Vinci by Yuri Ankarani. Well, of course, this is the reference to the titans of the Renaissance part of the European art history, who used to be not only the painter and also the inventor, the engineer, the scientist, the writer, the person of universal knowledge and skills and experience, who's worked a lot with the Vitruvian Man and also worked with an image of a human being and believed in the endless capabilities of a human being. We can also remember his aim to create the first device with the help of which the human being could fly in the sky. And this is the work which depicts the work of the surgeons, the achievements and of the most modern methodologies of the surgeries, the implementation of complicated surgeries on the human body, when the surgeon, without touching the body, is using the overcomplicated device which is called Da Vinci. And this is the video which was shown on the bigger screen. It showed us the work of the surgeon on the one hand, which is totally complicated and crazy and just claims a precision, knowledge and skills, but on the other hand, it showed what the surgeon himself saw, so we could see inside the body. Let us watch just half a minute of this video. Thank you. So it was kind of a short teaser, so you can see that besides the portrait of a surgeon or a kind of a trialogue between the person, the device and the human body or the organism which is being operated on, there is a kind of a fascination of the director with this device aesthetics, because this device is becoming a machine, becoming as a subject, as the role of this movie. So you should remember this image of the self-moving device. It will come back just in one biennale in the end of my lecture. It will be a kind of an interesting rhyme with this part. The next exhibition, which we will be speaking about in a very short way, was taking place in 2015, which was called All the World's Futures. So in the name itself we can see the main topic with which the curator Okwul Enwezor was working, one of the most prominent world curators. I will tell a couple of words about him separately. So the topic of the exhibition was a very complicated present, the current situation in the world with all of the conflicts, cataclysms and social, political and climate ones, environmental ones. So the world is splitting apart. The weekly and just daily in the news, there are certain global events which are changing our perception of the world and don't give us an opportunity to foresee, to predict and to be sure what will happen with us the next day. So in this case, the curator comes to the art, the practice of the art as the one of a territory, the area which can help us think about those future scenarios. But it's obvious that there can't be only one scenario. So the futures of the world could be different, diverse, and we can take part in the programming of them, or at least we can try to think with the help of the, again, well, maybe not with the help of, but being inspired by the artists. We can also include our fantasy, our critical thinking, our imagination to program our own lives and our futures. It's important to mention here that the curator's personality, Okwul Enwezor, is very important because he is one of the first black curators who was world and renowned. He was one of the highest and well-known curators who unfortunately passed away several years ago, rather early, but thanks to the work of this curator, thanks to the work of such important forum of Venice Biennale, a very different important castle exhibition which is taking place every 5 years for the canon of the history of modern art, where included lots of artists from the African continent and lots of beyond European context who reside and work beyond the countries of Western Europe or United States of America. So this is the practice of decolonization of the modern art is recently and seriously taken place thanks to Okwul Enwezor. A couple of works from this exhibition. First of all, a very important work of one of the most prominent artists, of Kerry James Marshall. If I'm not mistaken, he was included to the ranking of the publication of Art Forum either this year or last year, a huge world publication which publishes the list of the 100 most influential actors of modern art. It can include artists and collectioners and anybody. So Kerry James Marshall was named one of the most influential personalities of the modern art. What does that mean? It means that his art, his ideas, his participants in the art process is really substantial, had substantial impact onto what the art is today and how the collectioners and the curators and the wider audience perceive it. If I can tell you about the practice of the Marshall in a nutshell, he depicted on his canvases rather elegant ones and just perfect ones from the perspective of the art, of the painting, of the formal qualities, but he depicts just black people, so this is a very direct or straightforward gesture, but with it he provides a certain historical fairness, maybe even restating the place of the black person in the bigger art, at the high art, in the biggest canvas. And this format, a huge picturesque canvas, if we look at the whole tradition of the art history, beginning with Renaissance, even we can remember Tintoretto, this place, this format has always been booked by the white-skinned people. So, of course, Marshall is very subtle and elegant, using the opportunities of the art, making a very serious political statement. One more artist, Ibrahim Mahama, who's using in his art, in his installations, we don't see any person, we don't see the image of a person, but in the creation of his installation, well, lots of people took part in the creation, well, besides himself. How is he creating them? He is creating the similar projects in different exhibitions, and it's also reflected in his attitude, who the artist is today, who is the human being, and how can a usual person take part in the creation of the art piece. A huge installation of his was created out of the real bags, huge rude fabric bags, which store and transport cocoa in. This is a traditional export product from the African countries, and again it is the reference to the colonial history, to the history of slavery, to the social and racial discrimination story, inequality, and to the trade and farmers. Those practices of collecting, harvesting, and this exhaustion of aerial lands of certain countries, the products of which were used by other countries. So creating his work out of these bags, he's not recreating them, he's collecting them with the help of the people. He asks the people to give him away those bags which were really used. So he takes the whole down the whole museum of the history of trade of cocoa, and those bags are very demonstrative. If you are inside of this installation, it's important to say that this is not the part of the internal exposition. It's done open air, a kind of a corridor, a way which brings you from one pavilion to another one at the Biennale. So this is the way, the road. If you visit the Venice Biennale, at least a couple of times a day, you will definitely go through it, because it's a kind of a promenade. So when you're inside, this rude aesthetics, this rude expression of these bags totally impresses you and has a very sensitive impact onto the viewer, and just instantaneously it gives the birth to a certain image and impression. So again, I can repeat myself, there is no image of the person, but this installation is totally about a human being, about our new inclusive attitude and attention to the people, to our cohabitants of the planet Earth, whom maybe other cohabitants did not pay attention or did not pay enough attention. They didn't know anything about their life and fate. One more work from this Biennale is the one by the artist Coco Fusco. This artist took part in the Biennale of 2015, but with a different work. But I'd like to say a couple of words about this work, exactly, which I personally saw at a different Biennale in Liverpool. So this work was devoted to a kind of an image of a Dr. Zira. Dr. Zira is an character from the movie The Planet of the Apes, who emerged in the numerous sequels and continuations and in different reflections of this story, which was suggested in the movie The Planet of the Apes. So this work was a kind of a lecture slash performance. Coco Fusco was totally redressed, and she totally had the special makeup to look like this doctor, the ape woman, because we can see her on the image, in fact. And she read the lectures about the history of the humanity and the history of the animals, the history of coexistence of different species. So it was a very performative lecture. People could pose any questions. She answered those questions, and to a certain extent it was a kind of a very important issue, which is raised more and more often in the artists in different works. Who, in fact, is the main subject of the life on the earth? The human being, the animal, and do the animals have right to have the same vote, or participants, the right to vote, formally saying, in the life of our planet and its development? So why did the human being reserve or book this kind of a ruling state? All of those questions were raised at the exhibition, and this image is very demonstrative, which can be seen at the cover of this magazine, and who's totally surrealistic as an ape, but totally convincing anthropomorphic features and traits. The next Biennale we are watching is the Biennale of 2017, which had a very poetic name, Viva Arte Viva. So let the living art live, if we translate it literally. So going on with the topics of the previous Biennales, the curator of this Biennale, Christine Macel, has developed the topic that the art and the work of the artists is the most important tool, the most important way or practice, which helps us not only to rethink and to live through what is going on with us in this complicated world when we are having all those permanent cataclysms, but also it can help us to put up with that, and sometimes during the complicated moments to find certain poetry or even beauty, a certain piece of light and hope. And maybe it was one of the most poetic biennales, and one of the, well, if I may use the word beautiful, it was one of the most beautiful expositions. In particular, this exhibition showed the emphasis onto the handmade practices. So we didn't have that many digital works, video and media art. We had more of textile, we had more of sculptures out of natural materials, more of works with natural materials, with various pigments and fabrics and minerals. It wasn't done in an artificial way. It was in fact the result of the research, what are the artists working with all over the world. At the moment and now we can see the certain tendency of coming back to the handmade works, coming back to the beauty of the natural materials, which does not cancel the different tendency of the development of digital media, but those are the tendencies which exist simultaneously. So a very important piece of this Biennale was the invitation of the artists, the younger artists, the ones who traditionally used not to have an opportunity to get to such a huge and famous forum as the Venice Biennale, which is naturally presenting rather important and famous names in the art, because Biennale is a kind of a milestone in the career of an artist. But in the case of the Biennale of 2017, they emphasized on the artists who are younger, in the beginning of their career way and their practice. And on the other hand, the artists, which is named in English underrepresented, the artists who, under certain circumstances, passed away too early, or maybe didn't get in time to the next level of representation, or maybe the artists who were excluded from the art history, from the institutional environment, the artists outsiders, the artists representatives of art brut, unprofessional artists, the artists with disabilities. So here we can see Judith Scott, who is one of the most famous artists with the Down syndrome, but also she's just a very famous artist whose works are in the bigger museums and exhibitions, and at this Biennale as well. The curator has taken a separate space for her, the whole hall with the enfilade of Arsenal in Venice. And what's important in the conversation about Judith Scott, that she was working with the threads and created the huge sculptures and objects of smaller size who seem to be kind of abstract first, as if it's a kind of several layers of threads with different textile elements, but in fact they were really anthropomorphic, and all of those objects remind us, especially if you observe them live, they remind us certain abstracted human body or some separate fragments of the body, but you shouldn't perceive it as a kind of, well, I don't know, literally anatomically. Those fragments of the body is more of a capability of the artist to rethink the person, not only in his or her entirety, biological entirety, but to think about the person as a kind of an essence who is consisting of different parts, both literally and symbolically. And the empty chair, of course, is kind of a very sensitive and embodiment which shows us the presence of the person whom we don't see, but reminds us constantly that about the place of the person, about his or her environment. One more peculiarly important work for me is the work of the artist from the Philippines, David Medalla. Why it's so important? Well, because this work was presented in Kyiv. It used to be presented in Kyiv. This is the work A Stitch in Time. So A Stitch in Time. This is the work which is rather participative. The work which was done by the artist lots of times. This is in fact the essence. What do I mean when I say participative? Because the co-creation is done and by the invitation of all of the visitors of the exhibition. This is the very long cover or white, snow-white canvas as an half an arc, on the one side of which they had a high kind of a rope where they hang numerous threads and small needles, and everybody who wanted had an opportunity to sew in or to just to stick with the help of those threads anything, just any subject, or a piece of a drawing, something from your own pocket, or maybe kind of a cover from a candy, or some note, or maybe the ticket for Vaporetto, just anything. Whatever the person had on him or her, so which also represents the material part of the person, which the person can be separated from, making it a part of the sculpture. And in this participative approach, in this co-creation, we could see the reflection of this openness of the modern art for the co-creation, this refusal to have the only author as the dictator of the sense. This work can be redone and rethought every time. Every time it will be totally new and will reflect the moods, the wishes, the desires and interests of the people who visited this Biennale in this city this year. So this work was presented in Kyiv within Gogol Festival for the invitation of the Foundation of Modern Art Eidos. David did not come himself, but his partners, his colleague, the artist Adam Nurkevich, created this work. So if you can see the fixation of this work online, it was, by the way, in the Art Arsenal as well, in the Arsenal within one of the first Gogol Fests. And we are moving to the last for today, Biennale, the one which we're speaking about today. It gave the name to the whole lecture of ours today, May You Live in Interesting Times. We can interpret it in different ways in Ukrainian, but this Biennale directly reflected not only the image of the human being, how the person perceives him or herself, but how our perception of ourselves, our place in the society and the society as a whole, which impact is done by the media, and which is the stage of the development where the media are today, in the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, with all of the fakes and manipulations of the social opinion, and the development of the internet stage, where it's not that easy to separate the truth from the construction, from some media manipulation. So the name itself reflects the state of a vagueness of the borders between the truth and the fake, the truth and the lies. So may you live in interesting times. I wish you to live in interesting times. It's a kind of a pseudo-Chinese wisdom, because it was considered for a long time that this phrase was done by this or that Chinese philosopher, a kind of a Chinese curse, considering the ancient Chinese philosophy that stability and predictability used to be considered as a virtue, but unpredictability and surprises of the fate were kind of a curse. So may you live in interesting times was considered to be a Chinese curse, but in fact it's a fake. It's not true. In the beginning of the 20th century, I don't remember who just mentioned that, referring to the Chinese, but now it's proved that it's not true. It's a kind of a fake wisdom. And the Biennale itself, the curator of which was Ralph Rugo, British-American curator, was devoted to how we are manipulated by the media and how it is rethought by the modern art. The modern art was a kind of a lost rock of, maybe not of the truth, but at least of the area where the human being can formulate his or her opinion, to think critically, to be in doubts, not to believe, to try to find the alternative truth. Alternative not like fake, but alternative as the individual, which is based upon your own feelings and your own experience. One of the key works at this Biennale, which also concerned the image of a human being and the ability of the person to construct for him or herself an alternative part of life beyond some of the stable conventions, was the work of Marie Katayama, the artist from Japan, who, because of a very rare disease of hers, had certain body deformities. When she was 9 years old, her legs were amputated, and she also has some deformities of her arms and hands, but her whole artistic practice is a kind of an aesthetization of her bodily image and the rethinking of what the body should be and is. It was devoted to certain bodily restrictions, or what was considered to be disadvantages. It can be a different body reality, so the person, him or herself, can choose what to do with his or her body, what the body gives to you and what you give to the body. It used a very wonderful and elegant series of pictures where we could see the artist herself, some portraits which were added by her personal belongings, her things, and altogether it all created a very complicated and sensitive self-portrait of this author. The conversation about this Biennale wouldn't be full without the video work of John Refman, a very famous artist, which is very relevant within the context of Linoleum Festival. He's working in the animation, which is done in the aesthetics of the computer games. This is a kind of the video which is a kind of a dystopian, anti-utopian scenario of the future, how the people will look like and how they will interact. Let's watch a short excerpt.
I had a good time, but I'm ready to go.
Well, thank you. I think that we can move on. I do apologize that it's a kind of a creepy experience of this video, because it was a kind of a provocative one within its show of violence, how the human beings are shown within it. But yes, this is dystopia, this is anti-utopia, so I think that you don't need any additional comment on that or any additional interpretation. The person who is vanishing in the mirror, the person who is the puppet, and the person who is washed down the toilet, those are the images taken from the mass culture from the TV. So Refman was really precisely and accurately watching all of the images which we know already, but here concentrates them to some absurd number. And I would like to finish with two works of the Chinese artists Sun Yan and Peng Yu. These were two sculptures in different parts of the exhibition. I will comment about them first, and then we'll see how those sculptures were functioning, because they were kinetic, they were moving. We are not seeing a person in any of them, a miniature of the person, but both of them are, I do emphasize, they dramatize the image of the person, they dramatize the place which the person takes or which it loses. Especially it concerns the second work, when the person loses that because of the pressure of the video technologies. You can just remember the Yuri Karanin video where the surgeon had to operate with a huge device. And we can see the same in the work of Sun Yan and Peng Yu. Again, the device which operates without any human interference. We don't understand what is going on with it. People can observe its own active life, the life on its own, behind the transparent fence. So let us just watch how the sculptures were functioning, and I'd like to leave their interpretation for your consideration, because the whole practice of this Chinese duo is very spectacular. They are really creating interesting works, giving them poetic and multi-significance names. Can't help, for instance, you can say, I can't help doing something, or I can't help myself. And the first work has the name of Dear. And again, how both the images and the works can be interpreted in various ways. But when you see those works, well, not live, but when they act, you will quickly be able to formulate your own image. And in fact, and I'd like to finish my speech on that. We'll just watch half a minute of those two videos, and then we'll come to Q&A session. Please, the videos now.
The resource which we were taking these videos from also added some of the wonderful comments which allow us to better understand, which were adding to what I mentioned, the human-like movements of the machine. Therefore, once again, you can retell the visual experience of Biennale. It's especially complicated when you're trying to retell what was happening at 5 different biennales. But I hope that you realized how the human image was changing, how it was transformed, what were the tricks that were used by artists, and probably it also allowed you to track what was happening starting 2011 to 2019. I hope that majority of you will have a chance to visit Biennale in 2022 now. Actually, that's quite soon, and believe me, this is a great experience. This is something that's very sophisticated, intellectual, and aesthetic, something that will stay with you for a long time. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm ready to answer your questions if we have some. Lisa, thank you for such saturated explanation of what was happening at Venice Biennale. And yes, we have several questions, and one of them is by Alexander. I wonder why they decided to introduce the part of a movie by Bartman to their video with fragments with the clocks. Why was this fragment used? This is great that you managed to see that, because I didn't quite realize that. Well, first, this is quite a well-known film, so this also is something very important for the history of cinematography. You know, this is, how do I put it right? This is like something that you can trip over. When you're looking at these clocks, if you keep looking at it for 5-10 minutes, you already see certain perception pattern, and you start realizing what you're gonna see in a minute's time. And when the time passes, you understand that next you're gonna see a clock that shows 10:05, then 10:06, then 10:07, and the next frame. So this is like a surprise and a game with a viewer. And one more question, which we could not omit, a question that is related to the Open Group project and your opinion. Could you please share your opinion with Mariya Dream Plane? Is it good or was it a failure in your opinion? This is a great question. It doesn't seem that it have to directly do with our conversation, but I think that the conversation around this project is a very good illustration, which allows us to understand that art is a space for creating alternative opinion, alternative futures for the humanity, and how this project was created. I don't want to retell its whole background because I believe that the person has this question and they know it. You can Google it simply if you are not aware of it. There are lots of different texts. You can find out what was happening with that project. In a nutshell, in the beginning it was stated, and we don't know whether it was supposed to be so, or maybe that was just an artistic statement, that over Venice, on the day when Biennale will open, Mariya plane will fly over it, produced in Ukraine, the largest one. It didn't in the end. But the project was implemented in a different way. There were other elements which were part of the final pavilion, but we don't know. We were not informed, and I believe that it doesn't matter whether it flew over or not, whether it was supposed to happen or whether it was a fake and a provocation by artists. But while this project was being implemented, developed, worked on, its artistic directors and Minister of Culture as an organizer of the pavilion, all of the artistic community in Ukraine has gone through lots of different scandals, discussions that surrounded this project. Many things have changed since how artists are treating what National Pavilion is. I think that this myth was destroyed, that this Biennale is the thing that you should aspire for. So the story with Biennale has changed for Ukraine, and this is very important. What this project caused, that it created some of the hot topics, well, is important. That's why I believe that it was a very timely project, very timely for Ukrainian context. Lisa, thank you. There was one more question from me. Can we tell that image of a human today is not as interesting for the art compared to topics of environment, nature, and all other things that are happening at the global level? And would we be able to say that human image is now not that important? Well, I wouldn't say so. I would rather say that human being is not the most important thing. And if the artists use the image of human being or humanity, humankind, this is not the element which is the focal point, with other things developing around it, like life and processes on the planet. The human being changes from subject to object. And on the forefront we see the thing that before were considered something of a secondary nature by a human being, such as the space, life of animals, nature. I believe that now we are playing the secondary role. Maybe it is a change for better or for worse, don't know. Well, so far we don't have new questions, but there was one more question which I would like to use to wrap up our today's meeting. What artist do we have to Google right now? Asks Alexander. Your biggest discovery over the last time? Wow, this is a question that you should prepare for. Ukrainian or international? Well, I guess that doesn't matter. Well, To be honest, this is very complicated. Talking about Ukrainian, it will be not a painter, but a group of artists, Atelier Normal. This is a group of artists who are working on the one hand as a community and on the other hand as a school where they are teaching people how to draw. This is an exchange school for artists with and without Down syndrome. This is something unprecedented for Ukraine. This is a very inclusive initiative, but I don't like the word inclusive, because when you say inclusivity, it means that there is something exclusive. In this case, this is not a social initiative. This is very artistic initiative, which allows people to be united by the interest towards art, some common ideas, rather than some biological and other factors. So you can Google Atelier Normal. I think that they will be celebrities of art scene in the future in Ukraine. They have Instagram profile, they already participated in an exhibition, so they're already a part of the Ukrainian art community. Talking about international, well, I haven't been outside Ukraine for a while now, and you can't really work with art online, at least I. And one of the artists that I wanted to include to today's presentation, Lawrence Abdam. This is an artist working with the sound on the one hand, and on the other hand, he works, he's an artist. He was nominated for Turner Prize last year, one of the biggest awards and prizes in art in Britain and worldwide. He's quite young, he's in his 30s. His works at the edge of art. He works as a detective. He's trying to research how the sound complements other systems in your body, other perception organs, and how sound can be material or immaterial clue in some crimes, political crimes, tortures, political prisoners, or police brutality happening in different countries. And he's been invited to different court rulings as a sound expert who can analyze the sound thanks to technology, thanks to working with other people. He's not simply listening to it and saying, oh, this is it. This is a person who is mixing artistic approach and research, and here we're talking about visual art and sound, which is a very important component. This is an artist that is very interesting to follow. He is well known. This is not a new person, but yeah, follow him. Lisa, thank you. And it's very interesting that you have mentioned Atelier Normal and inclusiveness, because this Saturday we will have a discussion that will be led by Katerina Yakovenko, and one of the curators of this atelier will be one of the speakers. This is a very important topic, and we will get back to it later. And once again, thank you for today's lecture. Lisaveta German with us.